Yes.
So I have a follow-up question about this conversation on family.
Sure.
Like family as a unit for creating more democratic society, right? So that's the argument.
Sure.
But family itself is a fabric of the society. So every family would represent those social values. For example, liberal democratic values. In Western family, the way the family is very liberal democratic. Think for yourself, very individualistic within itself. But in Eastern cultures or other cultures, the family is completely conceived differently in itself. So if we are arguing for family as the unit for liberal democracy, but we also perceive families very differently, and they also represent those larger social constructions or philosophical views. So how you can reconcile with that? Yeah.
That's a great question. So no doubt, huge cultural differences in family practices across the world, and understandings of family. I guess one thing I would say though is that I guess you could say family life, like in the United States, is liberal democratic in some senses. Like there is like a certain mode of parenting that seems to want to produce like autonomous, high-functioning individuals. No doubt about that. But I mean, we can point to lots of other aspects of family life in the United States that have nothing to do with liberal democracy. Like children don't vote with their parents necessarily. Like, you know, what are we going to eat for supper tonight? You know, like it's whatever I make.
Children have a lot more say. You know, they might have a lot more say in choosing things as compared to some other very conservative, let's say, in Eastern societies. You know, because you cannot think of family as its own entity. It is part of the larger society, and that would reflect those values. Like for example, parents went to those liberal democratic schools. They are trained there. They think like that. They have this media, this society around them, which is feeding them certain values. So unless they are coming from another, like immigrant families, they might have their own specific unit of thinking or different value system. But if you are from the same society, how can you differentiate, or how you can draw a line? Yes, this is an entity in its own.
It's a great question. I mean, I think in a communitarian view of democracy or society, like society is not this container in which families and individuals exist. Like all that exists are concrete communities, and the family is one of those. Okay, and society is like nothing bigger. There's no uniform society out there. There are lots of little communities. Dewey's vision of the Great Society, he calls it, which I think is akin to Dr. King's notion of the beloved society, are these communities increasingly finding ways to interact with other communities within the larger society. So all that exists in some ways are communities, and these communities have different values. Yeah, and they have different ways of meeting the wants and needs of individuals. So, you know, we would have to get specific. I guess I would just say, we can talk in the abstract about, you know, Western families, Eastern families, but the question for Dewey, at least, would always be about particular families. How are wants and needs met in particular families? And I don't think any generalizing beyond that is actually that helpful, except to say that that family, of course, is in interaction with other communities around it. But I wouldn't set up this view of the family, you know, as somehow separate from this larger society. You know, I think that's the way we tend to do it in the West or in liberal democratic theory. But I think it's much more helpful to see the family organism as a community with tentacles out to other communities. Of course, there's intercourse with the larger society, which just means with other communities. But yeah. I guess that's the best I can do on that. But it's a great question. It's a wonderful question.
But there are ways, though, Kyle, in which an individual comes to embody dynamics of the collective.
Yes,
The
of
idea
course.
of the great individual, for example,
Yes.
is able to sort of mobilize and serve as a projective repository for a broader sense of the collective. So to some degree, that's sort of what Sarah is talking about, it seems to me, is referring to, and maybe not necessarily at the level of the family, but there does seem to be something other than just these families, groups of families and communities of families. There does seem to be something that's, at least to me, as I look at society and what's going on today especially, there does seem to be some kind of overarching dynamic that seems to grab hold of people and get expressed through individuals and through families and through communities. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying the individual is an expression of the group, I agree with that, and that no individual belongs to just one group, but to many interacting and competing groups. Is there something, beyond these groups? I think, I'm not quite sure here if you're pointing toward something like state power, dominant discourses, hegemonic ideas. I mean, if that's what you're concerned.
It's more than that. It's emotional. It's a powerful emotionality that grabs people. I think that's how I understand Hitler's Germany, or at least part of where he drew his strength from. When you hear, I was listening just this morning as people were talking about, why Trump, why they give so much credit to and credence to Trump, and it was because he's talking about me, he's expressing what I feel, so it was like looking at him as this sort of mouthpiece of the individual and of the group and of the community. He has come to represent, for many people, I think, this broader voice.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared to talk about.
No, another brown bag.
That's another brown bag.
Yeah.
I guess one thing comes,
Yeah.
is this genuine communication now, or is this miseducation? Is this miscommunication? I mean, certainly any robust theory of democracy needs to take account of, that is, when someone projects onto a figure like that, how do we analyze that relationship? I mean, certainly you're right to point to like emotional resonances. But in terms of the importance of conjoint experience, for Dewey is a normative ideal, so Dewey is is a normative philosopher. He's trying to point to ways in which we can enrich our experience, and saying Trump's got my back, he understands what my life is like, I don't think that would be a normative example of conjoint experience.
No, but that is happening in many countries now.
Strong
This
leaders.
is the same narrative which is really picked up in many countries. It's like this formula is working. So I think we really need to think what is driving people to associate themselves with that kind of narration and that kind of story. And obviously, we are really missing that part of coexisting together in peace and harmony. It's all about me. It's all about myself.
But it's a head versus heart thing, I think,
Yeah.
Kyle. It's like, the more we try to understand this weird power that Trump has through an intellectual lens, the less able we are unable to understand the power of the draw, because I think the power of the draw is emotional, it's mythical, it's all of those things that sort of the parts of us that, and again, I don't know a lot about Dewey, but Dewey didn't seem to speak a lot to that dimension of the human condition, that sort of under.
I don't know. I mean, in terms of aesthetic experience, to me, it's moving from the instrumental to exactly these notions.
Okay, that's true. That's true.
For Dewey. So.
Second half of life, though, right?
Well, I think, I mean, perhaps.
Yeah.
But his instrumentalism, his ethics was never like the whole story for him.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
I mean, all I can say there is like, again, for Dewey, the most powerful forces acting against democratic living are the forces of isolation, personal alienation, segregation, and we just know we're not very good at, we're a very segregated society right now, not just racially, but in terms of social class, in terms of how people make a living. I mean, I don't need to tell you, but there's a lot of disdain in liberal, academic, whatever circles for Trump supporters. Assuming that there's no basis upon which a Trump supporter and I could have a conversation or could come to a right relationship. And I think that's what Dewey would be most concerned about. Like, why can't we come into this type of relationship?
Right.
It's not that of conjoined experience. I think we all have examples of we're all going to Thanksgiving. I heard this on public radio yesterday, and so we're all going to be coming into contact, at least here in the States, with people who we radically disagree with.
Tips for
around the
surviving.
table. So what's the strategy here?
Just smile.
Alcohol?
Yeah.
That helps.
Football and hunting, everything else is off limits.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
comments.
It's good stuff.
That was good.
Heart-
Wonderful.
heart-provoking.
Another question or two before we wrap up here. Kyle, I want to thank you again for giving a really interesting and thought-provoking talk for us today, and interesting discussion also that followed. Thank you everyone for coming today, and so please join me again in thanking Kyle. All right.
Good job.